Good evening, trustees. My name is Peter Eglin. I come before you to speak against the motion, now withdrawn but not defeated, to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. I'm a resident of Kitchener with grandnieces and grandnephews about to enter the school system here. I care about what they will be taught. I'm also a sociologist who spent 40 years as a professor in the Department of Sociology at Wilfrid Laurier University, retiring in 2016. For the last 25 of those years, I taught a third-year course in human rights. The contemporary human rights movement is founded, of course, in the response to the Holocaust, the genocide against the Jews of Europe by Nazi Germany. And so it was that in the first class in the course, students would watch a most discomforting documentary on the subject titled Genocide 1941 to 1945. The first op-ed on human rights I had published in the press was in the Kitchener-Waterloo Record, as it was called then, in response to the outbreak of anti-Semitism at European Sound Imports on King Street in downtown Kitchener in 1992. I had joined the street protests at the time. The hatred of Jews, the blaming of Jews for Christ's crucifixion, for the downfall of Western civilization, for staffing a global conspiracy to rule the world, and the rest of the appalling tropes of anti-Semitism, including denial of the Holocaust, are simply anathema. That any upholder of human rights, indeed any person claiming to be decent, must simply reject and oppose whenever and wherever anti-Semitism raises its ugly head. I recount this brief history to establish my bona fides when dealing with this topic. I am not Jewish. I abhor anti-Semitism, as I'm sure you all do. And there is no question in my mind that it has its own special place in the 2,000-year history of the Christian West, culminating in that dreadful attempt to exterminate Europe's Jews. The question then arises, what has any of this to do with the motion, now down but not out, to have the WRDSB adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism? I take it that the Holocaust and anti-Semitism have been topics in the school curriculum for many years now. I didn't actually need to tell university students about them since they'd been exposed to them probably more than once during their school years. It has not been uncommon for schools to have local Holocaust survivors participate in classes on the topic. Moreover, one does not need to look further than the dictionary for a definition of anti-Semitism. Oxford Reference, for example, defines it as hatred, I quote, hatred of and hostility toward the Jews, at times including the belief that they pose a threat to society and should be eliminated, unquote. Anyone teaching a school class on the topic could start there and elaborate by detailing the tropes I've already mentioned, with which any educated person is presumably familiar. And indeed, that's pretty much what the IHRA working definition and its first four examples actually do. In the interest of time, let me abbreviate them, the first four. 1, calling for the killing of Jews for political or religious reasons. 2, demonizing Jews via the myth about a Jewish conspiracy to control the world. 3, blaming Jews as a whole for the actions of a person or group. And 4, denying the Holocaust. So much is surely unobjectionable in the IHRA definition. Indeed, it might be a useful reference for teachers in training should their school or university education have left them ignorant of such. It's the remaining 7 examples that pose the problem, inviting the question why they included. Accusing Israel of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust, accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel than their own nations, claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor, applying double standards to Israel, attaching classical anti-Semitic tropes to Israel, comparing contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis, and holding Jews collectively responsible for actions of the state of Israel. All 7 reference Israel, not simply Jews. They are themselves attempts at specifying the claim that, quote, Israel is the new Jew, a canard that's been around for the last 2 decades or more. It was taken up in the title of an academic article by political science scientist Reg Whittaker, published in 2004. The article's subtitle is The Canadian-Israeli Lobby Today. In other words, Whittaker is identifying and analyzing a political practice, namely the redefining of hatred of Jews to include criticism of the state of Israel by a political actor, namely the Israel lobby in Canada. So you have to ask, why is the Canadian-Israel lobby continuing to do this, including trying to get every civil institutional administration in the country to adopt the IHRA definition? If you look into it, it turns out that each time Israel suffers a setback in its ongoing project to ethnically cleanse the Palestine/Israel of its indigenous inhabitants, it mounts a propaganda campaign in which some version of Israel is the new Jew figures. You can read all about it in a book by the vilified Jewish American intellectual Norman Finkelstein. It's called Beyond Chutzpah, on the misuse of anti-Semitism and the abuse of history. University of California Press, 2005, updated edition 2008. One is entitled The Not So New Anti-Semitism. He writes that beginning in 1974, renewed in 1982, and again in 2003, quote, the main purpose behind these periodic, meticulously orchestrated media extravaganzas is not to fight anti-Semitism, but rather to exploit the historical suffering of Jews in order to immunize Israel against criticism. I would add now that the current onslaught of IHRA propaganda is a mark of the growing shift in worldwide public opinion in favor of the Palestinians, following egregious atrocities perpetrated by Israel on them in recent years. Its purpose is to intimidate, pure and simple. Don't you even think about uttering a word of criticism of Israel. Israel's murderous oppression of the Palestinians is an unquestionable fact, renewed each day as it kills Palestinians in the West Bank who resist its illegal occupation, and attested to by an unread mountain of human rights reports, including the Goldstone report for the United Nations Human Rights Council that found that Israel had committed war crimes in Operation Cast Lead against Gaza in 2008-2009, and by successive United Nations special rapporteurs on the human rights situation in the occupied territories of Palestine, the latest of whom is Professor Michael Link of Western University, with whom I once shared a platform. In the last year or so, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, and Professor Link have all described Israel as an apartheid state from the river to the sea. Apartheid is an international crime, not just a name. The push for institutions like the school board to adopt the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism is part of the propaganda campaign relentlessly pursued by ministries of the Israeli government via a network of Israel lobby organizations around the world, notably in Canada, the most, and I quote, the most pro-Israel country in the world, unquote, according to former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, and especially in Toronto, quote, the most Zionist community in the world, unquote, according to the United Jewish Appeal Federation of Greater Toronto. Israel doesn't deserve criticism so much as it deserves prosecution by the International Criminal Court for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and apartheid. When it comes to the education of our children and grandchildren, what concerns me is the self-censorship of Canadian government, media, and educational institutions in the face of this unparalleled assault on the truth. In the end, the campaign to get Canadian institutions to adopt the IHRA definition is not about semantics, lexicography, or human rights. It's about intimidation. It's your job to resist that intimidation and its consequent self-censorship, and to expose the facts to the light of day for the educational benefit of children.
1 minute. Oh. Does that conclude your presentation?
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, trustees, I provided some leeway on the last delegate, but we do have several in front of us, so please keep your questions to questions of clarification only about what the delegate has spoken about, please. Trustee Renzi?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the delegation for its presentation. My question through you to the delegation is, I'm just kind of wondering, Madam Chair, what definition of apartheid is being used, considering that my understanding with respect to what takes place in Israel is that we have Arabs, Muslim Arabs, that are sitting in the Israeli version of our parliament. And my basic understanding, I'm not as well learned as the delegation, but apartheid would mean that, you know, if we look at the model used in South Africa, for example, is that that was used in South Africa. It was an apartness where it was that the parliament was just for one group of people. So I'm just trying to reconcile that with some of the inflammatory statements that you've made. If you could just clarify, please, as to what your definition of apartheid is.
The use of inflammatory.
Okay, I'll withdraw that. I will withdraw that, Madam Chair. Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
But I'd just like a definition, what the definition is being relied upon to suggest that Israel is an apartheid state.
So your question is, what definition is the delegate using for
Correct.
apartheid?
Yes.
Thank you.
I wasn't using any definition of apartheid. I was appealing to the reports by Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, B'Tselem, Professor Michael Link, Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in the Occupied Territories. They call it apartheid. I defer to them. I'm just a humble ex-sociologist.